Back in September of 2017, a channel called Film Theory uploaded a video talking about an anime called Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood. In this specific episode, the theory revolved around what the value was of a human soul. Given how much I love that anime, which by the way you should totally watch, the video was very interesting. Fast forward to today, and I've kind of forgotten about it. Until I was getting some Twilight Princess footage for a Zelda video and came across one of the game's side quests. When the player is traveling through Castletown to meet Princess Zelda a second time, you come across a room full of gold. After defeating the Poe, you meet a character named Giovanni who sold his soul for untold riches. However, as a result, he was turned into a gold statue. To break his curse, the player must find all 60 imp Poes in Hyrule and kill them to take back parts of his soul. Going back to Giovanni after getting 20 of the souls regains his mobility, and he will reward you with a bottle filled with Great Fairy's tears. But the curse isn't completely broken as he remains golden. In the HD version of the game, he also rewards you with a ghost lantern that makes collecting the other 4 a lot easier. Upon breaking the curse, Giovanni will thank the player with 200 rupees. Quite a rip-off if you ask me. But the real reward comes from talking to his cat Gangle, as he will give you 200 rupees every time you visit him. It's quite a hilarious outcome when you think about it, especially since Giovanni's girlfriend had dumped him for another man. But this poses a question. How much did Giovanni really lose in this trade? What is the value of a Hylian soul in The Legend of Zelda? We already run into our first problem. Exactly how are we supposed to determine the value of a soul? Well, thanks to how the quest is laid out, we can get a good idea of how it's measured. We know that Giovanni had sold his soul for riches, and the only way to break the curse is to collect 60 of the Poe souls scattered across the land. With this information, it's safe to assume that his soul was broken up into 60 pieces, one for each imp Poe. Well, that and the fact that he straight up tells us this info. This means that we already have a comparison to go by. One Hylian soul is equal to 60 Poe souls. That's a good starting point. And yes, I said starting point. The question now is, how much is a single Poe soul worth? Well, I got some bad news. You can't sell Poe souls in The Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess, as they are items used exclusively for the quest. But they do appear in other Zelda games, but more importantly, they can also be sold. This will give us a rupee value as to how much one of these souls is worth. But now the problem is, what game do we reference for this theory? Poe souls appear in 3 different Zelda games of the series: Ocarina of Time, Majora's Mask, and Triforce Heroes. I'm going to ignore its appearance in Triforce Heroes as the game plays out very differently compared to other Zelda titles. Both Nintendo 64 games have the same 2 types of Poe souls that are attainable: the Poe soul that drops from normal enemies and the Big Poe soul, an item exclusive to the Big Poe enemies. The normal Poe soul sells for 10 rupees in Ocarina of Time and 50 in Majora's Mask, and the Big Poe souls are valued at 50 and 200 rupees. This means we have 4 values that can be used to determine the worth of a Hylian soul. Well, I guess technically 3 because 2 of them are the same number. Technically, we could eliminate the Big Poe souls as the items in Twilight Princess are clearly named Poe souls. But given the fact that only one type appears in the game, we'll acknowledge both types.
To be more clear, I am counting both Poe souls because only one type appears in Twilight Princess, meaning that there is no other Poe soul to compare the item to. A big Poe soul can only exist if it can be compared to a smaller one. Sorry to confuse you.
But how accurate is it to use any one of these values since we have 3 to choose from? Does that mean a Poe soul from Ocarina of Time is completely different from the one found in Majora's Mask? Not necessarily. This is where the concept of inflation comes in. One of the reasons diamonds are so expensive is because of how rare the gemstone is. In fact, this applies to basically anything that is sold. The less there is, the more valuable it is to people. Sometimes companies will control the distribution of a product so that the inflated prices can be maintained. In the 1800s, a massive deposit of diamonds was unearthed in Kimberley, South Africa. Because of the potentially sudden increase of diamonds in the market, the value of these stones would go down. To counter this, the company controlled how many were distributed to maximize the profit. If we look at Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask, the reason Big Poe souls are so valuable doesn't necessarily come from the fact that these Poes are bigger. but because of how rare they are compared to normal Poes. In Ocarina of Time, there are an unlimited amount of Poes in the world, while only 10 of the bigger variant exist. So, one big Poe equates to 5 smaller ones. It also explains why each soul is much more valuable in the sequel, as normal Poes can only be found in the Stone Tower Temple. 200 rupees for the big Poes doesn't sound so ridiculous once you realize that only 2 of them exist within Termina, one beneath the well and the other beneath the graveyard. So with that, which value should we use? I'm going to be fair and calculate my final answer with the 50 rupees value as it appeared in both games, being the price to sell a big Poe in Ocarina of Time and a normal Poe in Majora's Mask. I'll return to the 10 and 200 values later though. Unlike the episode where we calculated the probability of Link's success in Skyward Sword, this answer involves simplistic math. If the value of one Poe soul is 50 rupees and 60 of them make up a single Hylian soul, that means that multiplying both values together will give us the answer. And the results tell us that the value of a Hylian soul within The Legend of Zelda is a measly 3,000 rupees. Don't get me wrong, 3,000 is certainly a lot of rupees. But considering the fact that we are using it to find the worth of a person's soul, it's not very much. Now we're going to calculate something different. Remember our other values? Well, I hope so, since I just talked about it 2 paragraphs ago. Well, we're going to use them to get the minimum and maximum value, meaning that the answer to our question has to be within this margin at least. It's going to be a pretty big margin, but we might as well calculate it. Multiplying our smallest value of 10 rupees by 60 gives us an answer of 600, while the biggest value yields a whopping 12,000. This means that a Hylian soul is worth something between 600 and 12,000 rupees. At least, if we're going by the values from other Zelda games. Because there is something critical that we have missed this entire time. Remember that lesson on inflation and how it can greatly lower the value of something? Well, let's look back at the relation between the cost and rarity of Poes. In the case of Majora's Mask, big Poe souls had the highest value of 200 rupees. This is because of how only 2 exist in the entire game. In Ocarina of Time, the value is a quarter of that, but it makes sense since there were only 10 in the game. The moment Giovanni sold his soul for riches, 60 Poes were just unleashed onto the world of Hyrule. 6 times the amount of big Poes that exist in Ocarina of Time. Given how inflation works, this means that the value of a single Poe soul has drastically dropped because they are no longer rare. So how much is a Hylian soul worth in Twilight Princess? Probably not as much as you think. Alright, it's like 1:30 AM right now, but I want to quickly add something here. It's true that inflation greatly lowers the value of something, and that this would apply to the Poe souls. But there's a chance that a Hylian soul in itself is worth more than the 60 Poe souls that make it. This would make sense, especially if you compare them. Having 60 of something feels a lot less valuable than only 1 of something else. Given this information, I'm going to set the final value of Giovanni's soul at 3,000 rupees. Something else I didn't point out is that Gangle is also a statue. This might mean that all of the 60 Poe souls don't belong to him specifically. Anyways, carry on. But there is one more question that needs to be solved. Was this a fair trade? Or was Giovanni ripped off after giving up his soul? Obviously, being a statue kind of sucks. But let's compare the actual values of the items that were traded. While it's true that Giovanni's soul is probably not worth as much as we thought, the same thing could be said for all the gold within his chamber. The only currency Zelda games have ever gone by is rupees, so the value of gold isn't known. For all we know, it could be useless. What we really need is a way to compare how much rupees one can get for a certain amount of gold. Once we know that, we can get an idea of whether this deal benefits Giovanni wealth-wise. Surprisingly enough, we can get a good idea as to what the value of this gold is. In Majora's Mask, you can partake in a Goron race, and the reward for placing first is a bottle of gold dust. The main use for this is giving it to the blacksmith to upgrade your sword to a gilded sword. If you have already upgraded the weapon, Zubora will buy it off you for 40 rupees. But here's the thing. That isn't the actual value of the gold dust. From your exchanges with him, it's clear that he is trying to rip you off since it's such a valuable material. The real value of it can be found when you sell it at the Curiosity Shop, as Link can part ways with it for 200 rupees. And that's only for a bit of gold. There's a whole lot more in Giovanni's room. making him one of the richest people alive in the Zelda universe. His excessive wealth is also shown after freeing him of his curse, since Gengar will give you a whopping 200 rupees every time you visit him, which is kind of funny since that's the exact amount one bottle of gold dust nets you in Majora's Mask. But what about inflation? Wouldn't it apply to all this gold and make its value significantly lower? You're correct in thinking that. But remember our example with the diamonds? All Giovanni would have to do is control its distribution, all while keeping the rest of it hidden from the residents of Castletown. Unlike the Imp Pose, which are scattered across the land of Hyrule and can't be controlled. That is, only if someone comes along and helps him break a part of the curse. The funniest part about all this is that the deal to trade Giovanni's soul for untold riches benefits literally everyone except for him. While he can't move or do anything but speak, anyone who happens to find that gold will become the richest person in all of Hyrule. And even then, in order to regain mobility, all he has to do is get a third of his soul back. In that case, he would greatly benefit as long as he had someone to free him of his curse. And that's exactly what happens, as you the player help him in his quest to become a wealthy millionaire. It makes the 200 rupee reward pretty pathetic. But at least we still have Gangle. As PBG once said, he truly is the chillest cat in gaming. Special thanks to all my patrons, as your support is greatly appreciated. If you too want to donate $1 a month, then check the description below for a link, but never feel obligated to do so. Have a good day, guys.